All right, we've got one more action-packed session to bring to you. This gentleman has a fascinating pedigree, and I'm going to let him tell you those types of details, of course, but when we get talking about the legal aspects, of course, estate planning, thinking big about generational wealth, the family, all the impact, all the things that go with that, this is our source. Everybody welcome, please, Alex Schoephoerster. I almost got it.
Very close.
Okay.
Thank you. Well, thank you, everybody. Thanks for sticking around. I know we've got the Vikings game. You guys are going to have some lunch and a tour coming up, so I'm going to try to move pretty quickly through this. There is a lot to talk about, so it's not something we're going to get through everything in detail in the allotted time that we have. But the main goal here is to make sure that you guys are thinking of what's coming and what you're doing. My name is Alex Schoephoerster. I'm a partner at Moss & Barnett. Private business and estate planning is the work that I do. So the intersection of those two in particular, lots of buying and selling businesses, succession planning, entity formation, buy, sells, a variety of those things, but then also get to do some practice in the Bitcoin space and work with a lot of you on, whether it is building a Bitcoin mine, a facility, you're growing, you're acquiring new facilities, eventually maybe you're selling, but then on the back end, you're accumulating this Bitcoin and acquiring this asset, and what are we going to do with it? So first, we're going to talk about Bitcoin, then we're going to talk about estate planning, and then we're going to kind of combine the two. I think I'm missing a slide here, so I want to add. I had a quote. It was Michael Saylor's. If you've heard him, he talks about that, the magic of Bitcoin isn't that you can transport Bitcoin over 10,000 miles. It's that you can transport Bitcoin over 10,000 years. And that is a very meaningful quote, but the nuance there is that's not going to apply to all of us, and that's not going to apply to a lot of Bitcoiners. And the problem is we don't have a plan as to how we pass it on to our kids, or if we want to give it to a nonprofit, how do we get it to them once we're gone? And without a plan, you've all probably heard stats, whether it's 15, 20, maybe a little bit higher percent of Bitcoin that are lost, and essentially are lost forever unless and until some kind of quantum computer can hack some of those OG wallets, and we don't want that to end up being you. So the one thing I'm going to touch on first, I guess, is just whether or not you need an LLC from a business standpoint as you're mining. Think about your scale. If you're just doing it in your basement, probably not a big deal, right? You don't need to have an insurance policy in this structure to protect your assets. You start growing, you start getting bigger, you've got your own mining facility, maybe you've got some real estate, some contracts to deal with. It's time to get an LLC in place. A couple other things then that would have been up there, I'm not sure what happened, but in any event, is thinking about, okay, are you taking on money from investors, right? So if you've got some investors that are involved, maybe you're co-hosting, so they're not investing with you, but you are going to host their miners. You're going to have contracts with them. Now it's time that you start thinking about an LLC, or if you've got other partners, whether they're passive investors or just, hey, you've got a couple founders, you're going to come together, you're going to start this mining operation. Those are times it's time to put an LLC in place, get your buy-sell, get your paperwork in place. That protects your personal assets, keeps them separate. So if anything were to happen to that business, your core, your home, your bank account, car, savings account, whatever, all that stuff is separate and protected. So first is how do we actually own it, right? And obviously you guys are all dealing with this now. We learned a fair amount about it today. But ultimately, I tried to break it down into three kind of main sections that you can think about. So your self-custody, right? Your cold storage, your collaborative or multi-signature type structures, and then your full-on third-party structures. And there are some hybrids that might kind of fit in there, but I think you guys are pretty aware of kind of these different structures yourselves. But what you need to think about then is what's next? What's when you're not here? You've got your ledger or Trezor, whatever it is, your wallet is, you know where the key is, hopefully it's someplace safe. But thinking about, okay, what would my spouse be able to find it and use it? Would my kids, what does that look like? So here's just an overall chart, trying to think through some of the benefits. It's not going to be one size fits all. I know for most of us that have been around for a little while, feel like self-custody is the best, it's the most secure, and for us that probably is the case. That's not going to be the case for everybody else. And again, as we need to start thinking longer term, I'm sure you guys have all heard Saifedean's, thinking about your time preference and having a time preference where we can look into the future and focus on what that looks like. We need to be considering our family. So the two main aspects then, when we look at transitioning Bitcoin to our kids, is the legal title and the possession. We've all heard not your keys, not your coins, right? That's the possession. That's the one that's kind of the easy, low-hanging fruit as far as when we think about it, right? The legal aspect is more, okay, we should have an estate plan, and we're going to have to transfer legal title to this as well. So those are two very different things, right? And you need to make sure that we're covering both of those bases. So as we do move into then estate planning, your basic estate planning document is a will. Does everyone here have a will? No? No one wants to answer? All right, well, the correct answer is you all have a will. If you didn't create your own will, you actually get the state's will, at least in the United States. And now those are called the laws of intestacy. Now, for most Bitcoiners, we generally don't think that the government would do as good a job taking care of our stuff as we would do taking care of our stuff. So just keep in mind, if you don't create your own will, that means you get the state's will. Again, that's the laws of intestacy. Now, importantly, a will does not help you avoid probate. So what is probate? It's a lawsuit. It is a lawsuit that your assets essentially go through and your family have to go through in order to inherit assets from you. It's public. Most of us care about privacy, at least to a certain extent. We don't necessarily want everyone knowing what our kids get, when they get it, how that works, and it's expensive. It is in almost all cases going to be more expensive to deal with probate on the back end than it would be to do a plan on the front end in a way that helps you avoid probate. It's time consuming, it's stressful, it can take a year, it can take 2 years, so it's not a fun process. And if you don't have a will, another important piece is if you've got young kids like myself, well, what ends up happening is their assets will go into an account for them, and as soon as they turn 18, they'll get them. And for most of us, we think Bitcoin is going one direction when you zoom out, and most kids when they're 18 years old shouldn't have a huge inheritance. The trajectory of their life, being a member of society, a contributing member of society, decreases. The money doesn't last. It's not a good situation. So having a plan in place helps you mitigate that risk. So some of the basic documents, we've got some that isn't shown here. The main one I want to talk about is trust, and I think about trust as buckets, revocable trust. So what are these? You, your spouse, if you've got a spouse, would have your own trust, your own revocable trust, your own bucket. We put assets into that bucket, and that's how we fund the trust. And that bucket is a structure with a variety of benefits from helping to provide some tax shelter, depending on which states you live in, and provide some structure on when do kids get assets to these trusts. They're private. Assets that are in there are non-probate assets, so they don't have to go through probate. So again, trying to avoid probate as much as we can. So it makes it very easy. They're managed by a trustee. While you're alive, you're the trustee. You get to move assets in and out of it whenever you want. You don't have to change the trust, amend the trust, or anything like that. You can revoke it. That's why it's called a revocable trust. You can terminate it at any point. So it's a very easy, malleable process. And then you'll see on here, pour over wills. So when you do have a trust, you still want a will, and essentially that's a safety net under your bucket, because if an asset doesn't get into your bucket, we need to have a net underneath it to catch it and pour it over into the bucket, because that's where the structure is really going to be. A couple other documents just to mention on here, to be thinking about healthcare directive. Should be thinking about if I go into a hospital and I can communicate, I'm coherent, the doctor's going to listen to me, but if I'm not, who are they going to listen to? That's your healthcare directive. It appoints your healthcare agent. There's a variety of other ones as you kind of dig in a little bit on estate planning as to what probably should be included, and then there's some much more advanced strategies to be considered, but they're usually like kind of bolt-on strategies. You might have heard of a term like an ILIT, an irrevocable life insurance trust. There's grantor trust. There's a whole bunch of different ones, but core is the revocable trust. So let's go through, let's see here, I'm missing a little bit. All right, so estate taxes. In Minnesota, we do have an estate tax. If you have more than $3 million worth of stuff, you are going to pay estate tax here in Minnesota. That's about 16% on everything over $3 million. Now, technically, if you're married, you and your spouse both have it. The problem is, if you don't have a plan in place, like a revocable trust, something happens to you, your assets go to your spouse. Well, let's say between the two of you had $5 million. Well, all of your assets just went to her. She now has $5 million of assets. When she passes away, she's going to pay tax on that extra $2 million. At 15, 16%, it's going to be hundreds of thousands of dollars of tax obligations that she's going to have. A revocable trust allows you to duplicate your $3 million exemption so that you both get to take advantage of it. There is a federal estate tax as well. That's right now about 13.6 million. We do have a cliff coming at the end of next year where if new legislation is not passed, that 13.6 million is going to get cut in about half. So we're going to probably be about 6.5 or 7 million. It's adjusted for inflation, so it's not an exact number yet that we know. But ultimately, the long story short is there are estate taxes, both state and federal. So if you're not in Minnesota, some states don't have a state tax. Florida is a good example. Lots of people like to retire and go live in Florida. It doesn't have a state tax, so very tax favorable. But keep in mind, once that you reach that federal estate tax exemption, now you're paying 45% to the federal government. There are some offsets. So you net about half of your wealth above that estate tax exemption is going to the government. Now, that's usually not an ideal scenario, right? At worst case scenario, give it to a nonprofit, something like that. So making sure that you have a plan in place to utilize that, and or have a plan for the liquidity if you've got enough, estate or wealth that just, hey, I'm going to have an estate tax. Well, that's where we should be talking about whether it's life insurance or another mechanism, because when that tax comes due, you don't want to have to go sell, your business assets or your real estate or things like that. One other thing on tax I was going to mention, you do get a step up in basis, right? So if your Bitcoin has a basis of, call it $100,000, it's appreciated in value, now it's worth $1 million. That $1 million will be estate taxable. It won't be income taxable, and the basis for your beneficiaries will be that $1 million. So we'll get that step up in basis. One other note, when you think about your estate or your size, for a lot of people, it's like, well, I don't have that many assets. And then you ask, okay, do you have life insurance? Well, yeah, my wife and I each have $1 million life insurance policy. That's estate taxable. So it's very easy, or much easier than people think, to reach that threshold where you're going to be paying a substantial portion of your wealth that you've built up over decades to the government instead of to your kids. So revocable trust, we're going to move quickly here. I don't know why some stuff isn't showing. But let's move into Bitcoin for generations, right? So that's the goal. We build all this assets up. Maybe we want to buy a condo later. Maybe you want to, retire somewhere, buy an island, buy a Lambo, whatever it is, right? But at some point, what's next is the kids, right? Or a nonprofit, somewhere that you want your assets to go. If it's the government, fine. Don't listen to me. You don't have to do anything. But if it's someone else, it's time to get a plan in place. These assets, while they can survive for 10,000 years, are not going to if you don't have a plan in place. So when we think about Bitcoin, we do have Bitcoin itself, which we all know it's digital, right? It's not a tangible asset. Typically, there's some kind of tangible piece of property that comes with it. In particular, if you have a cold storage, you probably have some kind of USB. So that seems a little bit more tangible. So we need to be thinking about how this is covered. And I talked about earlier the two aspects, right? So the possession and the legal title. So legal title, that's much more on when you talk to your attorney. They should be able to handle that. Ideally, they have some familiarity with what this asset is so they can help you figure out how that transition works. Make sure that you do have an estate plan where you are assigning it to your beneficiaries so that legal title can transfer to them. The possession is a little bit more nuanced. Everyone holds it a little bit differently. Everyone has different priorities, but you do need to make sure that you have a plan in place. How are your kids, how's your spouse going to get access to this asset? Your keys, obviously, if you do have cold storage, or even, I suppose, for a lot of like the multi-sig or the custodial solutions, you've got your login information and password and things like that, but having the seed backup, you got to try to cover both. And obviously, it's a balancing act between how do I make this information available for them when they need it, but I don't want it on the internet. I don't want, obviously we don't want anyone getting access to your seed phrase, so making sure that that's protected, but also available when the time comes. So one of the things that I talk about with people is, when we're looking, so we're doing the legal stuff, fairly straightforward. We're talking about the possession side of things, trying to understand your current plan, what your family, how they're going to do it, and making sure that we think through, what does the actual trust say, right? Do we have a specific clause related to digital assets? That's usually a good idea. A lot of times we encourage referencing some kind of external memo or instruction letter, something like that. A little note to be careful there is, if we need to have the actual assignment take place in that other letter, now we're going to have to follow the statutory formalities for that letter. So for example, in Minnesota, you're going to need your witnesses, you're going to need to have it notarized. It makes it a lot more difficult. So we really want the core assignment still as part of the estate plan. and really it just references the letter for the access piece. How are you going to get access to it? Whether it's, if it is your cold storage, maybe it's in a safety deposit box where you've got your letter written, put it in something sealed. You can see if it's ever been tampered with. Have it someplace safe. You've probably thought about if it's cold storage, if it's on paper, keep in mind at home if your house burns down, what that's going to look like. Fire safes, typically paper still burned to a crisp or char, so having some kind of titanium solution or something like that. But making sure that you do have that plan and that document available if and when the time comes, because at some point it is going to. Make sure that you're clear about it, so understanding, in a lot of cases, maybe it's multiple wallets, right? And it can be one for each kid or however we have it structured. For most people, we don't see them having just one single wallet and all of your digital assets are in there. But if it is, make sure you understand that those amounts can change. So typically it's thinking about in percentage terms, what kind of percentages you might want split with the kids or nonprofit or however you want that to work. All right, so other considerations were not showing up here, but the main things I want to talk about here is some of the hybrid solutions. Some of you had a chance to hear from Chase Larson with St. Cloud Financial Credit Union building a kind of a hybrid, multi-sig type model, a local credit union level. You guys have probably heard of Bank of New York Mellon. They came out and they talked about how they're going to now be custodying, and I think they're doing their own kind of trust company that they're doing, but making sure that we understand this is an evolving space. You got to be a little bit flexible sometimes as to what things look like. You've all probably heard about quantum computing and that as a future risk, hopefully long time in the future, but just making sure you're kind of staying on top of it. Again, what are we really doing this for? And a lot of it is short term. It's now, or maybe it's a decade or two. It's retirement planning. But ultimately, what's the end goal? What are we trying to do for our kids, and how are we going to make sure that this doesn't go to waste? Just a quote that I kind of like here as well, just to end with one, is that, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. And that tends to be the case for most people. And so, again, the best thing to do, obviously, is to do the right thing. The second best thing you can do is, in many cases, the wrong thing. And the worst thing you can do a lot of times is not doing anything. And so just at least be thinking about it. Get that process started. It's not something that usually gets done on day one. You go talk to an attorney and you're done. It's, hey, this should be a little bit of a process where you're actually trying to do some critical thinking and figure out, hey, that's a great point. How do my family, how do they use this if I'm not here? And for most of us, my spouse isn't here, and that's totally okay. She's not into Bitcoin the way that I am. A-okay with that, but I want to make sure she gets access to it when she needs it. What questions do you guys have?
So if I put Bitcoin, say I bought Bitcoin and I put it on a hard wallet, and I have several of those, right, buried in multiple people's backyards. But I decide, hey, I want to give my dad some Bitcoin. So instead of doing it electronically, I hand him the seed phrase, and I'm his backup, right? So I hand him the seed phrase and everything else. And this is years ago, and it's in a shoebox somewhere. But it still looks like it's my Bitcoin. You know what I mean? Does it make sense?
Who would consider it your Bitcoin, I guess?
And like how does that work legally? Because if I didn't think about this kind of stuff way back when, but it's like, hey, take this. It's going to be awesome, Whoever opens the wallet, right? Yeah, so whoever opens the wallet, but electronically.
Well, and if we look at how is the government going to look at it, is there any document assigning it? Right? Now, you can make the argument that by giving him physical possession, that was me transferring it to him. It would be a gift. We should have a conversation on gift taxes, depending on how much it is. There's an exclusion of 18 grand you can gift to your family members. Once you get more than that, you're supposed to file a gift tax return. That eats away at your lifetime exemption that we talked about, the $3 million and the $13 million. But ultimately, having an assignment document and probably a receipt document are going to be some ways just papering the record, right, to show that, hey, this was done, it was accepted by the recipient, it was a valid transfer. If there was consideration, list what the consideration is. Otherwise, probably would consider it a gift. Obviously, totally separate if there's any transfers to employees. The IRS will want to treat that as compensation, but I'm guessing, if this was your dad, it was probably just a gift.
Yes, just a gift. Mm-hmm. Okay. But it doesn't, so yeah, definitely just a gift, but I'm just trying to make sure, like, if I gave him, let's say, hypothetically, 5 Bitcoin, and Bitcoin was $100 a piece, but now it's a house,
Yeah.
how does that work?
Well, so you'll want to think about his estate tax as well, and whether or not you want that in his estate or your estate, and going through the specifics on that. But I would actually go back or just sign now a document that says, hey, on such and such a date, or on or about such and such a date, I gifted and assigned this Bitcoin wallet, or this Nano or whatever it was, to my dad. He'll sign a receipt saying, accepted, basically, and you just, hopefully you never have to use it. But if the IRS or somebody does come knocking, that is going to be an important document to have. Absolutely. Yes.
But anyway, hey, if we want to, I'm assuming, because I know St. Cloud Federal Credit Union's here. I've talked to some of the guys here in the Brainerd. Hearing some of the other folks talk on the taxation side of things, I thought I had all my ducks in a row. Really don't. Do you have kind of a network I could, contact you, say I need legal help, maybe some, financing help, and potentially a CPA? Is there someone we could reach out to network with that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't have a great hub that's going to have everybody. What I will say is, so one of my roles is the president of the Minnesota Crypto Council, and one of our jobs there is to help educate people, and that includes helping make connections with folks that actually understand this industry. So I definitely think, join us in that community. We've got member meetings monthly. Would be a good opportunity. And also just, let's sit down, let's have lunch or coffee or something. Like you mentioned, we do have the credit union that's here in town. I don't know if we have any CPAs that are here today that would be local, but certainly can help you find one of those that understand a little bit about what this industry is as well. Good
Great,
question.
All right. Anyone else? Oh, right. I'll go close.
Yeah, so I was wondering, it just seems clear that in terms of estate planning, like, we basically all need to have a trust, correct? I mean, to avoid probate, which is not recommended.
I would say for a substantial majority, we're talking 90+% of the population, a revocable trust is a core and important piece of any estate plan, yes.
A revocable trust.
Typically, so the challenge, there are irrevocable trusts. The challenge there is once it's gone, it's gone. It is officially out of your estate. You don't control it anymore. You don't own it. You don't, if it's real estate, you can't sell it. If it's your home, you're leasing it. You got to make lease payments. So there are some circumstances where an irrevocable trust is used. Typically, you would still have your revocable trust. So yes, for our discussion here, the revocable trust is the main one, and then sometimes people will add on an irrevocable trust for a specific asset, a specific purpose.
But I'm assuming there's downsides to going the trust direction, the tax-wise. I mean, are distributions from a trust taxed as income?
So, well, it depends on how you look at it, because when you put assets in your trust, it's a revocable trust. The IRS, it's completely disregarded. So there's absolutely no difference between you owning the asset personally from the IRS, from a tax perspective, and your asset in the trust. Mm-hmm. So there wouldn't be any difference at that point. Some people like to have it in trust after they're gone for a period of time, so you can control it after it's gone a little bit. At that point, it would have its own EIN, it would have its own tax ID number in that case. There's some creditor protection and some kind of prenup protection that can come with that. Other people do distribute it out right away, but ultimately, the IRS is going to completely disregard it unless and until you're gone, and after that, the income that would be generated is going to be taxable anyway.
But I mean, for things like one's home or like a brokerage account where you have your stocks,
Yep.
that would go in a revocable trust, typically.
In most cases, yes.
What would be the reason for going for an irrevocable trust?
There are some people that try to, medical assistance planning is a complicated discussion. We need to actually get assets out of the estate if we're going to do that. A revocable trust is still part of your estate. It's not part of your probate estate. It's non-probate, but it is still part of your estate. So sometimes people might use that as a mechanism to try to, they get ready for the spend down if they're going to go on medical assistance, as an example.
Oh, so it's basically liability protection.
Liability protection. Yep.
Or means testing.
Yeah, or depending on the size of your estate, if you're above that threshold, in the 13 or down to 6 or probably closer to 7 at the end of next year for federal estate tax. You might want to do some gifting now actually to take advantage of that $13 million exemption before it gets cut in half.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
that could be another reason you would do some gifting sooner rather than later.
Well, it's assuming Trump doesn't get reelected and renews that, yeah.
But then we need Congress to be able to pass legislation as well. So it depends on who's in the House and Senate.
Oh, I see.
But yes, I would agree, much more likely.
Okay.
All right. Thank you for that. All right.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody.
Wait, hold
Oh,
on.
one more. All right.
Yeah, well, maybe at least 2 more. Hold on.
All right. All right. Yeah, we're good. I can't see. Sorry.
So yeah, my question is about children, young children holding Bitcoin. Does gifting Bitcoin to your children while they're still minors considered under that gift limit? Or-
It would still be subject to the gift limit. So if you're
Okay.
gifting more than 18,000, that's per adult per kid. So if you're married, each adult can gift up to 18,000 to each kid. So if you got
Even if it's held jointly?
Well, so if it's held jointly, it's not really a gift at that point, right? So like if you think about a bank account, and we were to add your kid to a joint bank account that you're on, that's not really a present gift to them. Now, what it does help with is the transition that asset now becomes a non-probate asset. It doesn't have to go through probate. The general rule for probate is if you can look at it and see where it goes, probably a non-probate asset. So in that case, joint ownership with rights of survivorship, you look at that asset, you see who's on the account. If something happens to one of them, the survivor of the two will inherit that. It won't have to go through probate, but that's probably when the actual gift would take place. Bitcoin is a little bit more challenging to say when it's a joint account, though.
Yeah, but can you just have a title document that says these 4 people, 2 of them are minors, are joint owners?
Yeah, it's a fair question. I don't think the IRS has really taken that up yet. I think it's going to depend on how much money they're missing out on and whether or not they're going to try to challenge it. But I think at that point, that document would still need to be part of your estate plan in order to make it an effective transfer. I don't know that the IRS would acknowledge or accept that we or an individual just unilaterally tries to say this is now a jointly owned asset.
Thank you.
Yeah, good question.
Good question. All right.
Next question. So one of my questions is Bitcoin being one of the assets of privacy. Is there any way to, I guess, package it where it can still maintain a privacy aspect to it? Because I'm thinking, all right, if I'm in Bitcoin, it's because I want to be private. I don't want the eyes of prying into what I have. Does that go out the window once it's put into a document, into a legal asset or somewhere where, hey, he had Bitcoin, now it's transferring, like, okay, now my privacy is completely gone, right? There's a whole point of, well, or at least for me, would be, I want that Bitcoin to maintain its privacy and incognito, and I can pass it on to whoever I want. Is there any way to package it or any way to, put it in some sort of legal form to maintain its privacy?
So first and foremost, within probate, no. It would end up being public. Not that your seed phrase is going to become public necessarily, but at the exact amount of Bitcoin that you had and who it went to and when they got it, all of that is going to become public if it goes through probate. So revocable trusts are private documents. You do need to make sure that you don't unintentionally get it published. Like if you do a real estate transaction and you're putting real estate into your trust, if you give them the trust, they might record that so it becomes public. But otherwise, revocable trusts are private documents. Now, we do need a way to identify the asset itself, right? So we have to reference, but that's where, if you have multiple cold storage wallets, maybe you put your kid's name on one of them, right? And you reference it. It's this cold storage wallet, and identify, whatever brand it is and things like that. It's got this person's name on it. But now we don't have to go through and say, okay, there's X amount of Bitcoin or whatever it is that you're holding and trying to transfer. So we can still maintain some of those aspects, but there is going to need to be some kind of disclosure in order for the beneficiaries to get access to it.
Right, okay. Yeah. That's my main question, is maintaining privacy behind the transaction and transfers.
Yep.
All right. Good one. All right. Anyone else? Yes, Sally. Hi.
Thanks. So you wouldn't want to put your seed phrase in a trust, but do you put like, you just say the contents of this safe are in the trust, or do you say, yeah?
I would probably focus more on wallet. So if it's with the,
So I don't understand that part because the seed phrase can be accessed from any wallet.
I'm thinking the physical cold storage. So that's where the
Correct. So if you have the
intangible.
seed phrase, you can throw out that wallet, buy a new wallet, use the same seed phrase.
Correct. So if we're not going to have the tangible asset anymore, then yes, then we need to reference the intangible asset, which is, in this case, when we're talking about keys, which is the seed phrase. So we are going to need a way to reference that. So whether it's in a specific safety deposit box, yes, absolutely. I would still put it in like an envelope or something so that if, whatever a bank teller or someone's with someone opening it, they don't necessarily see it. But yes, then we would need to reference the specific seed phrase, correct.
Okay, so, but you would say, don't reference the seed phrase, reference the container.
Or reference the instruction letter that's going to describe where the seed phrase is.
Right.
Yep.
Okay.
All right, Alex.
Awesome.
I think
Thank
we're
you,
gonna
guys.
wrap it. Everybody, thank you.